Puerto Rico, birthdays, and social security numbers. What could I possibly be talking about? Now, stick with me. Everyone's been asking me how my first tax season with Juno went, so I'm going to break it all down for you. And stick around to the end so you know what in the world I'm talking about. Thank you to my friends at Juno for sponsoring this video. Let's get into it. Going into tax season, I knew I needed the right perspective in order to properly utilize Juno. Like any tool, just because a company promises fancy bells and whistles doesn't mean the performance is going to match those promises. On the other hand, I also know the other story I see all the time. Practitioners will purchase software and leave it the equivalent of gathering dust on the shelf because they didn't spend the time to implement it. Remember when buying software meant you actually got a big box with a CD and the box literally sat on your shelf until you installed it? I needed a plan that would ensure I was getting the best value out of Juno and it was working for me, as opposed to me having to switch around my workflow to accommodate its requirements. Step 1 would be to figure out which parts of Juno I would be using. Right away, I saw that the Preparer and the Reviewer modules would be a positive addition to my workflow. Preparer reads all the client's tax documents, pulls the relevant data, allows you to validate anything it flags if it's not 100% certain that it's correct, and then automatically inputs that data into your tax software. Reviewer takes a copy of last year's return, the client's organizer, and this year's tax return, and does a thorough review comparing all the documents to each other as well as the source documents. The other parts of Juno, Assistant and Advisor, were certainly useful, but not integral to my day-to-day workflow. This tax season was a bit of a change even before adding Juno into the mix. I just hired my first employee, and that required me to reevaluate all of my tasks to figure out who should be doing what. Here's what I did. I had my assistant be in charge of all the document intake. I called it document staging. When a client uploads documents into my practice management software, Tenenbaum, we would make sure that the files were named appropriately, convert any images to PDFs, and check for duplicates. The next step was to send the documents over to Juno. Since we're using Tenenbaum, with the click of a button, all the files get ported right over to Juno. Juno actually then checks for duplicates and flags them inside Tenenbaum. So even if we miss something, it will make sure we aren't entering documents twice in the process. Juno also has the option of automatic renaming of documents. This is helpful if you're not touching the documents before sending them to Juno. One thing to note, having the Tenenbaum integration helped speed things up, since the integration takes care of creating a new client inside of Juno. If you're adding a client manually inside Juno, you need to enter the client's name, email, and last 4 of their social security number. The good news is, Juno has announced plans for additional practice management integrations, making this step easier as time goes on. Once the documents are in Juno, they automatically process and we do a review for any validation flags. At the beginning of tax season, I was checking each value manually. Towards the end, I became comfortable enough seeing how accurate Juno was that I only reviewed the values that got flagged. One thing to note, while Juno does offer a PDF workpaper, I didn't use it in my workflow. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Each firm needs to know which parts of software to implement and utilize and which parts to leave on the side for the time being. As useful as the PDF workpaper binder was, it didn't match well enough with my process to be worth using. In this step, there's also an Excel workpaper that you can download that shows you all the values and exactly how they're mapped. This is super useful for reviewing things like clients with lots of 1099s for self-employment income and clients with lots of charity receipts. Juno does a great job at capturing all of those documents and putting the values in an easy to read and check spreadsheet. You don't need to check through the spreadsheet every time, but it's always there if you need it. At this point in my process, the return was mostly prepared, besides for more complex things that didn't necessarily come from standard documents. Even still, Juno is super helpful at pointing out when the situation may warrant additional review. Even before the Reviewer module, the PDF workpaper and the Juno app shows you a list of items that may need additional input or review. For example, scholarships on a 1098-T, foreign income percentages on a 1099 dividend, or mortgage interest when the principal of the mortgage exceeds the limit to deduct all of the interest. You might ask, if you're going through the trouble of reviewing all these values inside of Juno, wouldn't it be easier to just input the return yourself? Here's my answer to that. First of all, knowledge doesn't scale. Systems scale. When you have a dedicated program like Juno, 100% focused on getting your documents data into the system with the greatest accuracy possible, you're now starting the return at a whole new level. While earlier your efforts went mostly into making sure the numbers got in their place, now you're starting out with that already taken care of. Believe it or not, us tax preparers get sleepy sometimes. You can't rely on a sleepy accountant. But a sleepy accountant can for sure use something like Juno to get the bulk of the work out of the way and focus on more important parts of the engagement. Secondly, you can have lower level staff take on the bulk of this data input. This actually helps solve a few things. It allows you to hire employees with less experience and very quickly get into the thick of things, learning as they go. Since the software is taking care of the mapping, they can follow along and learn exactly what to do. Once I've completed the return, I have my assistant upload the return into the Reviewer module. Reviewer has on many occasions caught mistakes, typos, and errors that I would have never caught on my own. A few examples of mistakes that it caught were wrong birth dates, the wrong dependent relationship, and missing W-2s. Did you know that bonds from Puerto Rico are exempt from state taxes? Well, I for sure did not know that, but Reviewer did. It caught those details all from a few small lines inside a 20-page 1099-B. I told you I would talk about Puerto Rico. Having Reviewer there to do this level of, review only opens the door to getting a better level of understanding and learning new topics that you didn't even know were applicable before. While some would argue that implementing software like this has to do with speed, I would say it has more to do with strong construction. Yes, there's certainly speed as part of the equation here. Right before the April 15th deadline, I was able to get clients' documents entered quicker than they could say estimated payment. But like a well-built building, you want to make sure that what you're building, in this case a tax return, doesn't fall apart. Systematizing knowledge ensures you have the opportunity to learn what you may not have had the chance to know before. And that will lead to a stronger, more robust, and defendable tax return. Now, should you be using Juno? That's something you'll need to decide on your own. I highly recommend going out and getting a demo so you can see it in action for yourself. If you're going to implement it, here's what I would recommend to ensure you'll get the most value out of it. Review your process to figure out exactly where Juno fits in. This may mean reworking your current process. This may mean adding a step in your workflow that you didn't have before. A large part of the payback of implementing Juno will be in getting it to work seamlessly in your workflow. Decide upfront who will be in charge of the processing in Juno. Like I said before, this could be your admin assistant or even a college intern just getting into the profession. Remember that implementing something new always takes time. Have the patience to get to the point where it's working for you. Don't let it sit on the shelf like that old CD box I mentioned before. And most importantly, use the parts of Juno that contribute positively to what you're trying to accomplish. At the end of the day, the goal is to get work done. Juno is just part of that journey. Don't just use a feature because it's there. Make sure it works for you. Knowledge doesn't scale. Systems scale. Go get a demo of Juno and see for yourself what you can accomplish.